Hey, this is Joe from Presonus. Today we're going to take the splitter tool in Studio One and combine it with a couple of different sounding compressors to create our own sort of hybrid analog style multi-band compressor. When I do presentations on Studio One and I get to the splitter tool, I usually make some sort of joke like it allows you to put a FET compressor on the low end and an optical compressor on the high end. You can take any compressors in your arsenal and only put them on certain parts of the signal. Truth is, though, I've never actually tested it. So that's what we're going to do today. But before we do, I've got to answer two questions. Question one, what is Splitter Tool? Splitter has been a part of Studio One for a long time, but it was kind of an under-the-hood sort of a feature that you got to by opening up a plugin and then clicking on this little button here, and then you could add the splitter this way. You can still do it that way, but now we've added Splitter as a listed plugin over here in the browser, so we can drag Splitter onto a channel to add the split. So as the name suggests, Splitter allows us to split the signal and then to do different things with the different sides of the split. There are three split modes. Normal split just means the same signal goes through both sides. So we could, for example, split this signal and heavily compress one copy and then not compress the other, like this, and we would be able to blend them back together to get that parallel compressed sound. And we can even adjust the amount of each side to get that blend just right. So this is something that you would normally have to do using multiple channels, multiple buses, multiple sends. You don't have to do that anymore. You can do it all here on a single channel using the splitter. So that's normal split mode. Channel split mode means channels as in the left and right channels of a stereo signal. So this allows us to process the left differently from the right. So depending on what you're working on, it may be a mastering project where maybe the left side has too much low end and the right side doesn't. You could just EQ the left-hand side. Or you can get into doing mid-side processing and things like that, because this allows us to, with a couple different things in place that we're not going to cover in this video, we could have the mid here and the side here and then process those independently. And finally, frequency split, which is what we're going to use today. This allows us to split the signal into two groups of frequencies, and that crossover point is adjustable here. So if we have it set like this, everything below 368 comes through this left side of the splitter, everything above comes to the right side. So we could then process, for example, the lows and the highs differently, which is what we're going to do today. And as you can imagine, you can put splitters on top of splitters and get this whole sort of family tree thing going. But today we're going to do it with just one splitter. Question number two, why not just use MultiBand Dynamics? As you probably already know, MultiBand Dynamics is a plugin inside of Studio One Professional that is essentially a 5-band multi-band compressor. We can have as few as 2 bands by just turning these bands down, right? Or as many as 5 different bands for multi-band compression. It's essentially the same thing as using the splitter tool to split the signal where we're compressing these frequencies differently from these frequencies. The only difference is this is kind of a stock, same sound of a compressor on each batch of frequencies, whereas with the splitter tool, we could put any plugin we want on the different frequency ranges, meaning we could put EQ on there, we could put compression on there, we could put different style and vibe of compressors on the different sides, and that's what we're going to do today. So MultiBand Dynamics is a great tool. I use it all the time, but today we're going to experiment with Splitter tool to give us a little more flexibility in tone. Okay, now let's test out Splitter with 2 different compressors. For this demonstration, we're going to put the splitter and the 2 plugins on our main output and process the entire mix, and we're going to use this section of this song. Here's what it sounds like before I add the plugins in. Help my unbelief. Real simple beat, nice deep low end with kick and bass, got a lot of mids and highs with all the other instruments. So here's what I set up, and I went ahead and did this a little bit before turning on the video just to save some time for you, but this is the setup that I have. Okay, let me zoom in a little bit so you can see exactly what's going on. First of all, if you didn't know, our Fat Channel plugin, if you click this button, it goes from seeing all the processors, the EQ, the compressor, and everything else, to just seeing one of them, and then you click on which one you want to see. It's great for saving some screen real estate, or for if you're doing something like this where you just want to see the compressors, which is what I want to see. So the one on the left here, you can see we have splitter here on our main output, on our master fader, and this splitter is in frequency split mode, and I've chosen to split it right at 150 hertz. So the lows are going through this fat channel, okay, 150 and below, and 150 and above are going through this one, number 2, okay? And these are just plugins inserted onto this channel, and they're each on either side of the split. So the first one is this one. We can tell by powering it on, we can see this one turns on, okay? This is the left one, the low one, this is the right one, the high one. Now this tube comp is one that you have in Studio One regardless of what version you're using. This one here, which is called Tube CB, it's a different sounding tube compressor. The reason I chose this is because it has more control over the attack and the release. This one's on the lows. This one's included if you are a Sphere member, or you can purchase this as a part of the Fat Channel collection. But the point here isn't that you have to use these specific plugins. The point is you can use any of your favorite compressor plugins because they just load in like plugins here. So while the splitter is a part of Studio One, the plugins can be whatever you'd like them to be. Okay? So the thought process here was, I want this is a smooth sounding compressor here. It doesn't have attack and release settings. It's all kind of program dependent. It's dependent on what sounds are going through. So you just dial in how much peak reduction you want, dial in the makeup gain, and it just has it's just a very pleasing sound. I use it on basic a lot. It sounds great on vocals, and it can sound great on an entire mix. The reason, just kind of zooming out a little bit more, the reason we would even consider using compressors on different frequency ranges is because if there's a lot of low frequency energy, sometimes those low frequencies can trigger the compressor in a way that we can't get much compression going without all the high frequencies being triggered as well. Meaning the low frequencies, the big kick drum, causes the compressor to clamp down, and if the compressor is compressing the entire sound from 20 hertz up to 20 kilohertz, then that means whenever the kick causes compression, the highs will be compressed as well. Right? Let me demonstrate that for you using this compressor here. We'll turn this off for a second. We'll drag this one here, so now it's on all frequencies. Listen to what happens to the mix when I turn this on. Help my unbelief. It's not super aggressive here, so it's not a huge deal, but you could hear it in the cymbals. The kick drum hits and the cymbals go to the kick drum. Sometimes that's pleasant, sometimes that's what you want, sort of that ducking sound. But if I want to go more aggressive on the low end and not on the high end, or vice versa, splitter makes that possibility. So let's listen to what's happening in the low end first. Here's the low frequencies of the splitter. By the way, you can turn different sides of the splitter on and off by clicking up here, or by clicking on the splitter and selecting to mute one side or the other. So let's mute the highs for a second and just listen to what we have in the lows here. And now listen to what happens when I turn on the compressor. It's kind of bouncing with the low end. So the kick drum's a little tighter, a little closer in volume, and the snare drum actually gets a little louder too. So it gets a little thicker because it's not triggering the compression. Only the kick drum is triggering the compressor. So that snare low end fatness gets turned up. This will make more sense in just a second. All right, here are the high frequencies with nothing. Help my unbelief. And here's the compressor. So it's mostly just getting triggered by the snare drum, which is kind of cool. So we get the kick drum's not triggering this compressor, so we can have a little more. Remember when I had this one going and only the kick drum was triggering it? That's some of the problems you find, is the kick drum triggers it more than the snare drum, so you get more compression on kicks and less on snares. This is a way to perhaps fix that. So let's listen to them all together now. I'm going to come over here, zoom out, and turn this one on and off. So we're turning everything off, and then I'll turn everything back on, and we can hear what it's doing to our entire mix. Help my unbelief. Now, admittedly, it's also, there's a little bit of extra volume there. In a perfect world, it'd be perfectly the same volume, but there's interesting things that are happening. Let me talk you through what I hear. The first thing I see is this. Check it out. kick, snare. See how these needles are moving at opposite each other? If I turn the music back up. So we literally have this compressor is moving mostly with the kick drum, this compressor is mostly moving with the snare drum, but it's compressing everything in the mix along with those two. But the kick drum isn't affecting the sound of the vocals, and the kick drum isn't affecting the sound of the snare, and vice versa. When the snare hits, it's not compressing the low end. So we get this kind of, it's almost like the compression is fairly aggressive, but it's fairly evenly distributed as well. I also opted for this compressor up here because it has a slow attack, so it lets that thump come through. If I make this a lot faster, you'll hear the low end kind of disappear. Check it out.
Help my unbelief.
Kick drum disappears because we're attacking it so quickly and it's adding so much more compression, we don't have any low end anymore. And it ends up just kind of defeating the purpose. I like slower attack on low frequency instruments like kick drum and bass a lot of times because it lets some of that punch through and then kind of compresses the tail end of the sound. Let's bring that attack back up.
Help my unbelief.
Now let me turn off just this compressor so you can hear what it's doing to the entire mix, how it's changing the relationship between the lows and the highs.
Help my unbelief.
Let's do the same thing with the high compressor.
Help my unbelief.
Since this song is so heavy on kick and snare, you hear that. That's why I picked it, because you can hear that compression happening. Kick is a little snappier, snare's got a little more aggression to it, and the rest of the mix just kind of gets a little more energy from it as well. What's really interesting to me is while this compressor is only compressing the low end, it affects the snap of the kick drum because it's allowed to come through more, right? If the low end is being compressed by this compressor, then if we had that on all the frequencies, that snap, that of the kick drum would get compressed as well, or would be altered. Here, it's just the low frequencies that are getting altered, so that snap of the kick drum is allowed to come through up here, which I find really interesting. So let's listen to it one more time, and I'll just turn these on and off so you can get an overall feel for what this is doing.
Help my unbelief.
This is really fascinating to me. I don't know where I would go with this. Would I get similar results with multiband dynamics? Maybe, but I like this idea of making it even more custom, and I like the end result better than what I did on this song when I actually mixed it, which is I used multiband to do essentially what we're doing here, but I like this a lot. So, am I going to do this forever? I don't know, but this has definitely opened my eyes and ears to a new way of thinking about it, and I would encourage you to do this same experiment on one of your mixes and see what you think. See if you can find some magical combination that becomes your new go-to for a while. That's what I love about what we do, is there are endless combinations of things that we can use, and this is just using stuff with Studio One. If you have other plugins that you use as well, the options become even more unlimited. Is that possible? I'm not sure. I was told there wouldn't be any math. Anyway, thanks for watching. My name is Joe. If you haven't subscribed already to our channel, please do so, and I'll see you in the next one.